Hello and welcome to the Klassiki Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Goff. Klassiki is your window into the world of Eastern European film. Subscribers gain access to our library of classic and contemporary films, as well as filmmaker interviews, video introductions, program notes, and more. You can sign up for a free trial today at klassiki.online. We've reached the end of our third season. Thank you to all our guests so far and to all our listeners for supporting us. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and please, as always, leave us a review and a 5-star rating so we can continue to reach as many people as possible. Thank you. At the end of April, Klassiki will be running a partnership with goEast, the festival of Central and Eastern European film that takes place every spring in Wiesbaden, Germany. It's our third year partnering with this fantastic and historic festival as it continues to go from strength to strength. So to look ahead to that partnership and to reflect on the shifting world of Eastern European film, I'm speaking this week with Heleen, who is stepping down this year as director of the festival after 8 years at the helm. Heleen has been at the forefront of curating Eastern European film during a turbulent and tragic period for the region. And she shared her perspectives with me on how to talk about and engage with the new realities facing filmmakers and film lovers, not least of which, of course, is Russia's ongoing war with Ukraine. We also spoke about curating the historical cinema of the region and her favourite discoveries during her time at the festival. You can find out more about this year's edition of goEast and Klassiki's upcoming partnership with the festival, which runs from the 24th of April, by following the links in the show description. Thank you, and see you again soon for Season 4 of the Klassiki Podcast. Heleen, thanks so much for joining us on the Klassiki Podcast ahead of goEast 2025.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Sam. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. So, I mean, there's so many things that you and I could talk about, given that you are the outgoing director of one of the biggest, if not the biggest, festival for Central and Eastern European film, which is what we're all about here at Klassiki.
Outside of Central and Eastern Europe, you mean?
Yes, of course. But let's just start with that tricky phrase, Central and Eastern European film. I remember a couple of years ago, I spoke to you for another interview, and that was in the more immediate context of the kind of ongoing aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And there was a lot of discussion around how to talk about this region that goEast and Klassiki both work in. And it was, it's still a live question, but now maybe with a slightly more distance. I was interested now, if I asked you the same question I asked you then, now, what should we call this region? How should we describe these cinemas as a whole? I wondered what you would say. What do you think about this term, Central and Eastern Europe?
Well, I think the term is highly artificial, and it's mostly
Right.
like a geopolitical category, I would say. I do think like in certain countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, people do identify as being Central European. But then the further you go east, it's the question, how do we categorize this? And I must say that now after 8 years of goEast, I quite like that the name is so ambiguous, and because it offers a lot of opportunities for introspection and also for discussions. Obviously, our festival, it has a historical background that we're called like this. The Soviet Union used to be also categorized as Eastern Europe. Right now, these are separate states, and a lot of them actually geographically are inside Asia. So the term is not correct at all. Like basically, we are a festival for the so-called post-socialist space. But then again, while traveling, I also met with people from Mongolia, and they were like, "Why aren't you including us?" And then course, you have to argue with the former Soviet Union and the successor states of the Soviet Union. I do think it's a valid categorization because the people from this vast space did live through similar events, economical events, but also cultural events, and the massive shifts that they went through are still affecting their lives very much. And I think, for one thing, the full-scale invasion in Ukraine by Russia has made it very clear that the geopolitical developments that started after the fall of communism, they're still ongoing. So, yeah.
I mean, I would agree with you, perhaps unsurprisingly, that I think it is still a valid concept or label, whatever you want to call it. I guess framing it in the terms you did there, the question then arises that, after a certain point, will it stop being valid? If it's valid because it refers to this 50 years, even less than 50 years even, where this whole region shared this kind of state socialist quality. And we're now, more than 30 years out from that. The question then arises, will there be a point at which it stops being valid? And how will we know?
Well, I think already now, a lot of filmmakers, artists, individuals from the countries themselves, they don't identify with this phrase post-socialist, right? It's an external term. So that's why I also said it's in a sense artificial. But the developments are still going on, and there are new spheres of influence right now. But what we also see is that there's a new relived kind of sense of self, identification with sometimes nationalist borders, sometimes with their own ethnicity, and also really rethinking what is our own culture about. Right? We see this development everywhere, from Ukraine to Georgia, to Kosovo, to Central Asian states. This also has very much to do with language. In a sense, these are classical post-colonial phenomena that we are seeing.
Yeah, I was going to ask. You are speaking with these filmmakers, these film artists, all the time. I wanted to ask what had replaced that more ambiguous or old-fashioned term. As you were saying, it's more a kind of classical nationalist identification, you think?
I don't think it's fair to put it like that, and especially if you're talking about artists, right?
Well, nationalist obviously has connotations. I just meant the identification is much more with the home nation than it is with any kind of broader geopolitical sphere, or however you want to put it.
I would say it is, but then again, we also have filmmakers from the Roma community, for instance, and filmmakers. They identify sometimes with the place where they live, sometimes with the Romani community. So it's a mixed bag, I would say. And when I say it's not fair to look at it like that, I don't mean the nationalism aspect per se. I more mean that we're not the Olympics. So
Right.
I mean, we do have a competition at our film festival, but we are dealing with individual artists with their individual interests, talents, and quirks. Right. So in that sense, we tend to always expect, because we are dealing with Central and Eastern Europe, that the topics that our filmmakers deal with also are typical for their country or region, and that they sort of represent this nation. And in a sense, that's also it's actually one of the goals of our festival, to make the cultures of these countries and regions more familiar here to Western European audiences. But at the same time, we have to be aware that we're inviting talented individual directors with their own vision. And it's sometimes really unfair that with the selection committee, we have a lot of discussions like, are we going to invite this film, which is very introverted and deals with a very personal story? If it was a film by a German filmmaker, it would be selected immediately. But is this story also relevant, quote unquote relevant, for our audience, or is it too local? So we have these silly discussions all the time, keeping the audience in mind. But it's sometimes I feel it's not fair towards the filmmakers.
Well, the dilemmas of curation and film programming. I mean, unanswerable questions. I
Yes.
wonder, I mean, you kind of touched on it there, but, it's important to bear in mind, something that we have to do at Klassiki as well, that you are kind of catering for or curating for, say, largely a Western European audience. If we believe in this dichotomy that the label of Eastern Europe kind of creates out of thin air,
Yeah.
that you're kind of working on behalf of people who are like necessarily excluded from this sphere that you're establishing with this label, and that there is like a tension. It just and inevitably there is necessarily a tension there. It can be a productive tension, but like it's important to bear in mind. I wonder, do the filmmakers that you work with, has there been, particularly in the last couple of years, any kind of pushback against your kind of framing them in terms of this region? Have
Yeah,
people
but
started saying, why do you call yourself a Eastern European Film Festival?
well, a good example is sometimes we like to play with the. There's obviously a lot of bias towards Eastern European communities. There's also a lot of people with Eastern European roots living here in Germany, and they do have sometimes a certain reputation. For instance, people from former Yugoslavia, from the
Mm,
Balkans, or there's like endless stupid jokes about Polish people stealing cars, these kind of things. And sometimes we like to play with these biases, with these prejudices. But we always do this together with curators from the region, actually. And this is a really fine line, and sometimes it goes wrong. And then, of course,
mm,
people accuse you of Orientalism, or they perceive it like that. Also, this year, our symposium, for instance, focuses on gender and aging in Eastern European cinema. And we have three curators. One is affiliated to the Sarajevo Film Festival, but she's also a researcher working at Frankfurt University, Asja Makarevic. Then we have two further curators that are affiliated with Cluj University. They're both from Romania, Boglarka Farkas and Andrea Virginias. And together with them, we invented the title Omas, Babas, Babushkas, Gender and Aging in Central and Eastern European film. Plus, alongside, we have a short film competition which has a similar topic, and it's called Revenge of the Babushka. But yes, there has been some pushback. There's on the one hand people that think it's great and really funny, and on the other hand people that really don't like it that a festival situated in Western Germany uses these very distinct terms. So we do have, with everything that we do, we always have a lot of explaining to do, but I think that's part of the job description. Most reactions have been positive, and then once you start a conversation, it also works. And I think it's not a bad approach. The same as with our festival title, which is also wrong in a sense. Like
mm.
when we speak about Kazakhstan, it's obviously not Eastern Europe.
Let alone Central Europe.
Yeah. And also the funniest thing also with our title, goEast, like Krzysztof Zanussi was like, He was our jury president in the very first edition of goEast, so before my time. But I later on I invited him for a retrospective, and we had an extended Q&A, which was lovely. He's such a nice person to have conversations with, even though we have very different views on life. He's like a really devout Catholic, and
Mm.
I'm a totally godless creature myself. But very, very interesting, very erudite. And his joke was like, I already said this to your predecessors. In order to go to Wiesbaden, I have to go west. This title just doesn't make sense. Go east. And Radu Jude, immediately, as he does, had associations with the Second World War and was like,
Sure.
whenever Germans say go east, I think it's it's time to get very wary.
Yeah.
So it's a provocative title in all senses of the word.
Well, I think that provocation can be productive, as you say. It's a question of starting the conversations.
But yeah, one thing I would like to add, which is really important to me as a quote unquote Western person myself, like we always work with people from the region. Like we always have curators on our team that either live there, were born there, or have
Sure.
connections to the team. And I think this is essential in order to run a festival like this, and also to when you're using these provocative titles.
Yeah. I remember when we spoke again a couple of years ago, again in the more immediate context of the invasion, the full scale invasion of Ukraine. And there was a lot of talk then. There still is now, but I get the feeling that the intensity has somewhat come down. Thinking about this region in terms of a kind of post-colonial framework or post-colonial conceptual system, and there was a lot of talk about reimagining our understanding of these different national cultures along these lines, and using this theory and this kind of theoretical vocabulary. And you were programming a lot, say, from indigenous nations or kind of communities, ethnicities within Russia. And this year you have this kind of retrospective, which I'd love to hear you tell us about, of Anastasia Lapsui and Marco Lemaskelio. We can get into who they are for people who aren't aware, but who Anastasia Lapsui made her name, as a kind of a documenter and an artist of certain kind of indigenous communities within Russia and Finland. So I wonder, again, with now a couple of years down the line, whether you find that this is still how people want to talk about and film the region, or how has that discourse shifted a bit? And then maybe you can tell us a bit about the Lapsui Lemaskelio retrospective this year.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I just find it very inspiring and also touching to see people that I don't really like this term marginalized communities and marginalized artists, but in essence, that's what we're talking about when we speak about indigenous peoples. I mean, it's not been so long that this discourse is really going on, and not only in the post-Soviet context, but also in countries like Canada or in Polynesia or Australia, New Zealand. So I think it's really important, and I think it's very touching to see the cinematographies of, I'm going to use the term now anyway, marginalized people, how they fight back, and how from this point of marginalization they actually they find creativity and they find ways of making their films and telling their stories, and often also creating a unique own visual, audio-visual language, which is the case with Anastasia Lapsui and Marco Lemuscalio for sure. And with the symposium that we had a few years ago, it made me rediscover things and also look at things with different eyes, and to really see this multitude of cultures that come from the post-Soviet space. And to be honest with you, at the time, I just forgot to include Anastasia Lapsui and Marco Lemuscalio because they've been at this for so long, which is so unique. But of course, because they're based in Finland, which is not part of our focus region, they kind of fell out of the symposium. But then I already wanted to do this retrospective last year, but for financial reasons, we could not do it. So I'm very happy that in my last year at goEast, we finally managed to get this program together. And just for context, for people who do not know them, Anastasia Lapsui was born on the Yamal Peninsula, which is in Siberia, and she belongs to the people of the Nenets. She had a very traumatic childhood, which really included her being forced to go to a Soviet boarding school. At that time, I think she was 7 or 8 years old. She did not speak Russian. She was used to a nomadic lifestyle and a nomadic diet. She had never eaten bread or kasha or stuff like that. And she was just put in this institution, forced to stay there. And apparently it was so traumatic to her that she went blind for a
Hmm.
couple of months, like as a psychosomatic reaction to what was going on. I think this forced Russification, which also took place in the Soviet Union, is quite typical. Also, the way that institutions use violence to well, officially it was for the good of the people. Like we brought the alphabet to the Chukchi. That's the official Soviet version that you see in a lot of films from the time, like the official Soviet films. With Lapsui, actually, what she managed to do, she became a journalist. So in the 80s, she was a radio journalist, and she was one of the first who had her own show in the Nenets language. So it was mostly a regional broadcast for the Nenets people, for the nomadic Nenets. And Marco Lemuscario was already a cinematographer and documentary filmmaker in his own right, who is very interested. He grew up in Finland, and he was very interested in, well, Finland in a way also has a really complex history of dealing with colonization
Yeah.
while also being colonized, right? You have the Sami people of the north that also, I mean, their living environment was massively reduced by the Finnish majority population. But then again, Finland was also always between Sweden and the Russian Empire. So this is really quite complicated, I would say. And Marco Lemus Kallio, he traveled to the Soviet Union and also to Russia in the 90s, and he started making films there, and that's where he met Anastasia Lapsui. And the rest is history. They started working together, then also living together. And in the 90s, Anastasia moved abroad to Finland. And this partly explains why so early on they could make very explicit films also about this
Right. Yeah.
colonial experience. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just as a bit of advertising, I should say that Anastasia is probably her most famous film, Seven Songs from the Tundra, will be available to watch on Klassiki as part of our partnership with goEast. So you can check that out in a few weeks after this episode comes out. It's interesting what you said, that because Lapsui in particular is so kind of groundbreaking in telling these kind of stories and making, working in film in this area. But because she was in Finland, she kind of fell through the curatorial gaps a little bit. Like is almost not kind of appreciated the degree, because she kind of was ahead of her time. She was ahead of this discourse catching up to kind of the idea of post-colonial identities and so on.
I mean, they're not world stars, obviously, but they have their work has been acknowledged by international film festivals. I mean, Seven Songs from the Tundra and The Bride from the Seventh Heaven have traveled widely and were seen all across the world. So it's not like they are unknown filmmakers. But yeah, in the context of Central and Eastern Europe, it is indeed true that and they've never been to goEast before, so this is really, it's high time that we acknowledge them and give them a retrospective.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's interesting what you said there about the complicated position of Finland in this example with Lapsui and Lemeskelio, because Finland obviously has a very problematic history towards its Sami population, but Finland would be recognized as a kind of victim of Russian imperialism. And I think it gets to potentially some kind of the potentially problematic aspects of these post-colonial conversations, in the way that we have to be careful not to use them to reductive ends, if you like. We obviously talk a lot now, quite rightly, about Russian imperialism in Eastern Europe. Does that mean we should talk about, for instance, Austria, which is geographically to the east of some of these countries, but would fall under your kind of Germanic Westernness? Should we talk about the Austrian Empire into the Balkans? How do we talk about Finland and the Sami and so on? So yeah, I find it interesting the ways in which you have to be careful to make sure that this is like a useful way of talking about the region and the cinema.
Well, I think we should start talking about it at all. Like
Sure,
in the
yes, of
German
course.
context, the German relationship with Eastern Europe. I'm not sure that the colonial lens is always useful, but to me, it's just that it's a lens. It's a new way of looking. It's a way of having a new perspective on things. And well, as I said, I'm a big fan of the concept of multidirectional memory, which is a concept developed by Michael Rothbard, who's a historian, and he originally he developed this concept in a post-colonial context, but also with regard to Holocaust remembrance, which of course in Germany is
Mm,
a very hot topic. But it can be applied, I think, anywhere, basically. And it just says that two things are allowed to exist next to each other, and we can compare them, and there
sure.
should not be taboos on comparison. But another thing, of course, there are really limits to the post-colonial concept, the decolonizing concept, if you only apply it to culture, because you can't
Right. Yeah.
decolonize if you don't look at the economy, at politics, and so many other aspects, right?
Well,
So I mean,
as people working in cinema with cinema, I think we can sometimes lose the run of ourselves, right? We kind of forget how much we exist downstream from certain kind of political or economic.
well, but
Yeah.
cinema is the most expensive one of the arts. It's
Well,
the one
exactly. Yeah.
that's most connected also to money, to production processes, right? So it's
Yeah.
in a way, it's very connected, and also our images, our ideas of political situations are very, very much determined by films.
Well, I kind of want to do a bit of a gear shift now because when we were discussing beforehand what we should talk about, there's so many things we can talk about when we're talking about goEast and Eastern Europe and so on. And I just want to quote you back to yourself because you said that one of the things that you love about goEast, having worked there now for a number of years, is that you're able to go against trends or invent them yourselves and screen films, kind of historical films, retrospectives that allow you to kind of expand your horizon, your perspective on these things. So let's turn it over to you, Heleen, now as the departing director of goEast. What are some of your favorite discoveries that you've made in these 8 years, and what are some of the trends that you've picked up on that a more casual observer who isn't in at the coal face of film curation every day might not have noticed?
Well, I think it's an enormous luxury that we, as a festival, because we're a part of DFF, which is a film heritage organization and also a member of the International Federation of Archives. We have huge possibilities to screen historical programs, and we also get them financed. And that's really a luxury that not all festivals, because we're fairly small, actually. You just called us one of the biggest Eastern European film festivals, but we're actually not that big. So it's really a luxury that we can do these historical programs and also do the symposium. And it's fantastic to see films on the big screen that I've known for many years, but only seen online. For instance, one of the underrated art forms is, of course, animation film.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to do an animation program about Hungarian and Estonian animation from the 70s
Mm.
is, of course, fantastic.
There's some great stuff there.
It's challenging for audiences, but I love Sándor Reisenbüchler, and
Oh yeah, so good.
um, so yeah, it's and I think his work is also in a way very touching, but challenging on the big screen, and especially if you have all the shorts one after another.
That's a psychedelic experience.
Yes, and well, it was called space age animation.
Mm.
So that's what we did, and of course, Nuku Film is fantastic and inspiring. The oldest animation, still running stop motion animation studio in the world from Tallinn. So we had great programs there as well. And it's really nice to see that sometimes we just rediscover films that then go on a journey. The usual route is Wiesbaden, then to our connections with the Arsenal in Berlin. They get screened there. Then sometimes the Austrian Film Museum picks them up, and from there, films make their way into the world. I was very, very pleased to see this happen to the retrospective for Lano Gogoberice,
Ah, yes.
a Georgian filmmaker.
The Great Lana.
Um, yeah, she's such a fantastic personality also. Like having her at the festival was extremely inspiring. Then another,
Another filmmaker who you can find on Klassiki. Her amazing films, some interviews about personal matters, a real kind of cult classic of Soviet Georgian filmmaking. Like, just can't recommend it enough. Anyway, sorry, carry on. I'll stop advertising.
no. What's also
Klassiki.
really great is having these female filmmakers at the festival with really extensive filmographies, because that's within the German cinematography actually quite rare. Like we have Margarete von Trotta, maybe we have
Ulrike Oettinger.
yes, Ulrike Oettinger, and then there's, well, there are some, of course, Helke Zander, but in comparison to Gogo Berice or to Marta Meseros, who
Mm.
was also sort of we did the first retrospective in Germany for her, and then afterwards she got the honorary bear at the Berlinale.
You're ahead of the curve.
Slightly, but yes, I think because we're small, we also have more freedom to test things out
Mm.
and to do things just as we like, and that's wonderful. Actually, it's such a luxury.
So that's some of the trends. And then just before I let you go, I'd love to know just a handful of your favorite titles, or maybe filmmakers, if you like, that you've discovered in these 8 years now that you're stepping away from goEast.
Yeah, I've really discovered a lot actually. I mean, one thing that I personally enjoyed a lot and that also resulted in a friendship was the retrospective we did for Radu Jude in 2020 during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite funny because I actually, the first time I really met him was during our extensive Q&A that we did via Zoom, and it was just it was a nice chat for like 1 hour, and the conversation just continued until this day. And Radu is really very generous, a generous person who also he tends to recommend a lot of things, and he sends you books and films, and so this is a really productive friendship, I would say. And one of the films that I'd actually already seen it, but I'd sort of forgotten about it, was La Dorni by Arthur Aristakisyan,
Mm-hmm.
Palms, called in English.
Yeah.
This period of filmmaking in the former Soviet Union is very interesting anyway, like the end of the 80s, beginning of the
Yeah.
90s. And this gritty 16 millimeter film poem set shot in Chisinau,
In
in what is
Moldova.
now in
Mm.
Moldova, where he is also originally from. It's such a beautiful, poetic, but also really, really hard film. That's actually also a great opportunity to program films like that again and make audiences familiar with them. And of course, that we have lots of audiences that also students or people that are not familiar with Soviet film or post-Soviet film, and for them, there's really a lot to discover.
That's a
And then
great film. Palms,
it
that's a great
is.
film. And obviously
It is.
Moldova, one of the most neglected or poorly known or understood countries in the whole of the region. So
In terms of film, it's kind of up and coming. Like with the new government, they actually took some measures to put more money into filmmaking. So there are some young filmmakers working right now, mostly documentaries, I have to say, around the Moldocs Festival. But it's quite interesting what's going on there. There's actually two periods I particularly like, and one is the late 70s, and the other one is the 90s when it comes
okay.
to to not just in Central and Eastern Europe, but the 90s. I think it's mostly because that was such an important time. I mean, it's referred to as the wild 90s, Lichie 90 in the post-Soviet sphere. So there
Yeah.
was, but it's also connected with a lot of artistic freedom and saying what you'd been wanting to say for a long time. And I think a lot of these films have this energy, also aggression sometimes, and sheer madness.
I mean,
Uh,
also the film industries did collapse in a lot
it
of, it was also a period of extreme difficulty just in terms of making a film or seeing a film.
or surviving.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. So one film that we actually screened twice during two different editions of goEast, it's called Orangerie and Juliette, Orange Vests. It's a
Hmm.
documentary. It's actually more or less a collective work by Studio Tetiana from Minsk.
Yeah.
I
I
think
remember
it
that
came out
one.
in yeah, it came out in 1993. Officially, it's made by Yuri Khashevsky. I think he sort of mentored actually the
Right.
women's collective because the film it's made as a letter to German feminist filmmaker Helge Sander. And it's filmed all over the Soviet Union. I mean, this was really filmed during the last days of the Soviet Union, and all of the topics that we see now that are going wrong, not just in that part of the world, but also over here, like militarization, environmental aspects, the treatment of women, and especially the horrors around childbirth and the bad treatment of mothers, all sorts of exploitation. They're shown from a feminist perspective in this post-Soviet time. So to me, this is a crucial work dealing with the fall of the Soviet Union. I think it's still very, very relevant and powerful today.
And again, from that one's from Belarus. I know it's from all, it's travels around the Soviet Union, but again, Belarus, another very important country that gets elided, gets forgotten when people talk about the region. I mean, especially in terms of the war in Ukraine, it's crazy to me how little people talk about Belarus and what's happened to Belarus under Lukashenko, because it's such a part of the whole campaign. But yeah, um,
Absolutely. I was recently asked to participate in a poll by the Belarusian Independent Film Academy, which is a group of filmmakers, mostly in exile, that are
we're big
uh,
fans. We're big fans of the of BIFA.
yes, BIFA, exactly. So I was asked to participate in their poll, like 100 years of Belarusian cinema, and it's so diverse. Like you have films from the silent period and from the 30s that were shot, and from the 20s that were shot in Yiddish, for instance.
Mm.
And then obviously there's the whole partisan cinema, but also the anti-partisan cinema. So there's it's quite a rich film history, actually.
And it also kind of informed a lot of film that isn't Belarusian. Like, for instance, The Ascent, the great film by Larissa Shapiko, is
Mm.
based on Belarusian author, and it's the film was shot in Moscow, but it's set in Belarus. So it's this presence that's there even in
It's all connected, isn't it?
any others? You mentioned the 70s.
Yes. I mean, this is a bit in. It's not in poor taste. But it's a very campy film, which I really really like, and we're going to screen it this year also as part of our anniversary program. So last year we had Boštjan Hladnik's film Ubi me nežno,
Kill Me Gently.
Kill Me Gently. Yes.
We had it on Klassiki as part of our partnership last year. Great
Oh
film.
yeah, so it was part of your program as well. Yeah. So we are screening it again because it was sold out. And then this is one of those examples, like some curators from other festivals saw the film, then requested it for their cinemas because it has a lot of nudity, a lot of erotic scenes. It's quite crazy, but in a beautiful setting, and it's just a lot of fun to watch. And there's also a lot to think about. Like the main character is an older woman who behaves in a very eccentric way, a very unexpected way. But is very self-assured also in her sexuality and what she wants, basically. And the soundtrack is fantastic, but it's kind of bizarre to think that in 79 this film was touring Yugoslavia and getting, I mean, I can imagine that it got full cinemas, but that it was shown at all. Like if you imagine any other country within the former post.
Well, yeah, Yugoslavia was always a somewhat special case in that regard. I remember, last year it was part of this queer cinema strand, and there was through that actually, and reading around it, last year I remember discovering loads about this kind of thread running through Yugoslav cinema of this kind of queer subversion that I wasn't particularly aware of, even though I was aware that Yugoslav cinema had a slightly more kind of open kind of liberal attitude.
So that's another favorite. Then I had to think of a film that we had in competition in my first year in 2018, which is a really, I kind of like compilation films. I've always liked them that use archives, but this is a really wild example. It's called Naš novi prezident, Our New President. It's made by Maxim Pozdorovkin, and it's a US-Russian co-production, actually, even though I don't think there came any money from Russia. And it looks at the presidential elections, and especially the campaign between Hillary Clinton and Trump at the time, but from a Russian perspective. And it's an insanely wild film, which starts with a visit of Hillary Clinton to, I think it's Barnaul. Sometime there was this archaeological find at the time of the.
Okay, so we're talking kind of provincial Russia.
That's where it starts.
Yeah.
That's where it starts, because he uses a lot of archive from everywhere. It's official TV footage, but it's also YouTube clips with ordinary Russians congratulating Trump. But the narrative arc that he creates is through this archaeological find, which was they believe it to be a warrior princess, and there's some kind of curse on it. And whenever you unearth her body and then look at it, according to local beliefs in Altai, you will be cursed. And so then the narrative is Hillary Clinton shows signs of sickness.
Oh no, she's been cursed.
You might remember all of this, the news cycle, that there was a lot of speculation.
And I remember, it seems a long time ago now.
It's ages ago, but it already was very crazy. And then in the end, it turns out that it's in fact a mummy of someone completely different. It was in fact a small boy. It was not the warrior princess at all. So it's,
so Hillary Clinton can't blame an ancient Russian curse for that one. That's good to know.
I think it was in Sundance, and then we got it, and I'm not sure where it was shown after that, but I think under the current circumstances, it has not lost its relevance.
Well, that's the case with so many of these historical films. I think we should probably stop ourselves before we just list every film released and screened from Eastern Europe in the last 100 years. Heleen, it's been a real pleasure. Congratulations on another goEast and on your time as a director there. And we're really looking forward to our partnership. Please, listeners, check out the links that we'll put in the show description to find out more about our partnership with goEast this year. Heleen Gerritsen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us and for rounding out season 3 of the Klassiki Podcast.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you for pronouncing my name perfectly.
You're very welcome.